So here we have an equation. Sine of x tan squared x and is equal to the negative of sine of a negative angle x. So we're trying to find the solution for x. So to begin with, we'll start with this negative angle. So in trigonometry, all angles, all positive angles, are measured anti-clockwise. So I'll put positive angles. Are measured anti-clockwise. So let's take the x-axis to be 0 degrees. Now if we were to move anti-clockwise, we would reach 90 and then 180 and so on. And if we were to move clockwise, we get negative angles. So if I were to draw a line starting from the origin, I get this angle over here. Let's name that as negative x. So we need the sine, the ratio of the sine for this angle. So let's draw a right angle triangle. So if I take three values for the base, the perpendicular, and the hypotenuse, and I name something like A, negative B, because it's in the negative axis of the y-axis, so negative B, and the hypotenuse can be named anything. Let's call it C. So if I were to reflect this triangle in the positive axis, then I would get, I'll draw it with a different color just to differentiate. So I would get this. And now if you notice, the A remains the same in both cases because this length hasn't changed, right? But the B will become positive and the C will remain the same. And this angle is positive x. Now if we compare sine of x, which is described as the opposite over the hypotenuse, or it's also described as the perpendicular over the hypotenuse. So now the opposite to the angle is side B, and the hypotenuse is right here, side C. So if I were to find sine x, I end up getting B over C. Now similarly, if I were working with this angle down here, sine of negative x, and I use the same idea of the ratio of the opposite with the hypotenuse for sine, I would get negative B over C. So if you see the relationship between sine x and sine negative x, you could conclude that sine x is the negative of sine x, the negative of sine x is the sine of negative x. And this conclusion is powerful because we can use this right here in this box. So if I replace sine of negative x by negative sine x, this is what I get. And then when I distribute the negative 3 inside, this will become a positive 3 sine x. So we're trying to solve the value of x. We want to find all the values of x. Now, whenever you have a situation like this, the best way to solve is to bring everything to one side and try to convert the other side as 0. So the easier way would be to subtract 3 sine x from both sides. So this will cancel to 0. We have sine x tan squared x minus 3 sine x. And then we see that the sine x can be factored. So let's factor the sine x. So if I factor it, I will have tan squared x minus 3 is equal to 0. And then I can solve further from here. So sine x is equal to 0, tan squared x minus 3 is equal to 0. And then I get tan squared x is equal to 3. And then I can solve from here. So if I were to take the inverse of inverse sine of 0, I would get these as my angles. 0, pi, 2 pi. It depends on what the range is for your angles. So if your angles are described between 0 and 2 pi, then you would get 0, pi, and 2 pi for the first part. And then similarly, you solve for tan squared x is equal to 3. Solutions would be, so we already solved this one, right? Get x as 0. Sorry, it's not degrees, it's in radians. So if our angle were in radians, we would have 0, pi, and 2 pi, given that the range is between 2 pi and 0. And then we have tan squared x is equal to 3. So the first thing to solve is to take the square root on both sides. And whenever we consider the square root, we add the positive and negative 3. So we get tan x is equal to positive and negative square root of 3. And then you have to consider all the angles that are involved over here. Okay? So if I were just to take the positive angle, my solutions would be x as pi over 3. And then in the third quarter, I would have pi plus pi third, which will become 4 pi third. So that would be the second set of solution. And then I can consider the negative aspect of the square root, and I would get tan x is equal to negative square root of 3. So my two solutions would be pi minus pi third and 2 pi minus pi third. And then I can simplify these. So the first angle would be 2 pi over 3, and the second one would be 5 pi over 3. So all my complete set of solutions would be all of these guys, all of these guys, and all of these guys. And it depends on the range. So if the range is between 0 and 90, or 0 and pi over 2, you wouldn't have to use all these angles. You would just use 0 and pi over 3. But if it's between 0 and 2 pi, you've got to list all these angles. So I hope this video was useful and it helped describe the solution for this question. Thank you.